Um deus, um gigante e um gênio da tecnologia. Em 2011, a Marvel já tinha apresentado boa parte de seus grandes heróis nas telas, mas faltava um cara que simbolizava tudo que eles queriam para este novo universo cinematográfico. Tinha chegado a hora do Marvel Studios fazer um filme de época para apresentar o Capitão América. Ambientado na Segunda Guerra Mundial, esse seria o filme que faria o link direto com os Vingadores, mas que também mudaria muita coisa dentro do estúdio. Agora, no especial Marvel 10 anos, vamos voltar no tempo para descobrir como o Sentinela da Liberdade ganhou vida em Capitão América, o primeiro Vingador. Como quase todos os heróis da Marvel, o Capitão América teve algumas versões nas telas antes de se juntar ao MCU, o universo cinematográfico da Marvel, que é como o estúdio chama todos os filmes lançados desde o Homem de Ferro. A primeira versão veio em 1979 com um filme para TV que mal lembrava os quadrinhos. Depois veio um filme na década de 90 que, de bom, trouxe apenas as cenas extras do filme que vamos falar agora, e que, além de tirar essas impressões ruins, tinha a missão de continuar o legado de Thor, Homem de Ferro e Hulk.
We talk a lot about how our movies are grounded and how they're based in the real world, which is not really true. They're based in the Marvel world. Whether it's being bit by a spider or getting hit by gamma radiation or cosmic radiation, or being stuck in a cave and building a big iron suit. Not the real world. What's real about it are the character interactions and the emotions. That's what resonates as being real.
Os direitos do personagem tinham passado por diversas mãos e, com isso, inúmeros projetos foram cogitados. Boa parte deles queria contar uma história do Capitão nos tempos atuais e descartar a origem na Segunda Guerra. Kevin Feige foi por outro lado. Fazer um filme de época era mais do que necessário e era o jeito ideal de diversificar os filmes do estúdio para apresentar esse personagem.
We've never done something where we had to recreate an actual time in history. And that, of course, is what Captain America is. It takes place from about 1941 to about 1944 in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in Italy, in London, outside of Berlin. So it had a lot of practical locations and a lot of amazing set work. And Rick Heinrichs, who was our production designer, really rose to the challenge. We took about 3 city blocks of Manchester, England, and turned it into Brooklyn of the early 40s, and it's astounding.
It's trying to get your head around the fact that this isn't just a new story you're telling people. This isn't a script that you get to, make the first tracks in the snow with. A lot of people have an idea of who this guy should be, and a lot of people really care about what you're going to do with it. So that's the tricky thing. How much of other people's opinions do you want to dedicate your performance to, and how much do you have to say, I gotta go with my gut.
E como os filmes anteriores, os diretores que passaram por esse projeto já meio que estavam dentro dos escolhidos pela Marvel. O Jon Favreau, de Homem de Ferro, e o Louis Leterrier, de O Incrível Hulk, chegaram a negociar para o filme, mas Kevin Feige tinha um nome preferido em mente: Joe Johnston. Nome pouco conhecido do grande público, Johnston é visto como um ícone dentro de Hollywood por ter participado de filmes muito importantes para toda uma geração.
I've been a huge fan of Joe Johnston for almost my entire life. He did a ton of design work on the original Star Wars movies. All of these iconic, the X-Wing, the Y-Wing, the Star Destroyers, the Millennium Falcon, he had a hand in. The storyboards, the action sequences in Raiders of the Lost Ark. These iconic moments in film today. October Sky, The Rocketeer. His career's been leading up to this.
E a conexão entre os dois foi além dessa admiração. O negócio é que Feige precisava de alguém com gana para fazer um filme de ação, um filme de época e um filme de super-herói ao mesmo tempo. E Johnston embarcou nessa com tudo.
Captain America has a kind of an old-fashioned feel to it.
It has a retro feel to it. I definitely wanted to set the movie in the period, and that was something that Marvel was agreeable to. Because we wanted to tell the origin story of who this guy was and where he came from in 1940. And we wanted to tell the origin story first. And after this, he can go be in the Avengers or sequels to Captain America. But we definitely wanted to tell the origin story.
Well, I wanted to make Captain America because he is not really a superhero. I mean, he doesn't have any superpowers. He's not even every man. He's below every man. But he's the kid next door who has this process performed on him, and he becomes the world's greatest athlete, plus 20%. And the interesting thing about the character, for me, was sort of the psychological issues that's going to bring up, that transformation, going from, skinny kid to Adonis.
A ideia de fazer um filme de herói no meio da Segunda Guerra necessitava de uma construção de cenário mais intensa e maior do que os filmes anteriores. As filmagens foram feitas na Inglaterra e quase tudo foi construído do zero, das casinhas aos figurinos, além de todos os outros sets que mostravam o interior da Hydra, organização antagonista do filme, e também do laboratório que transforma Steve Rogers.
Well, what's wonderful is it's set in that era, but it still feels very futuristic. So you're seeing these creations, these submarines that would never have been thought of. You're looking at different types of metal and guns in battle.
All those designs are based on practical designs of that era and then have been sort of enhanced slightly. There were a lot of Nazi designs of machinery and of weaponry which was never actually built, but we've built it, or we've built it either in a practical sense like you see behind me here, or we're going to be building stuff, even bigger stuff in the computer and having these vast pieces of machinery. It's kind of exciting to be able to try and be doing something which looks real but was never really quite realized.
E como não podia ser diferente, Chris Evans não foi a primeira opção da Marvel. John Krasinski e Ryan Phillippe chegaram a fazer testes para o papel e por muito pouco não foram escalados. A escolha final foi Evans, que já tinha vivido um herói nas telas, o Tocha Humana, nos primeiros filmes do Quarteto Fantástico. Mas mesmo após ser escolhido, ele não tinha certeza se queria seguir com aquele projeto. Ele sempre foi conhecido por ser mais discreto e menos afeito a festas e sempre disse querer ser um diretor de cinema. Querendo ou não, ele ia ser o Capitão América por pelo menos mais uns 6 filmes se aceitasse entrar nessa missão.
Not many people can say that they have played not one but two Marvel superheroes on screen. So was that a concern for you when you started talking to Marvel?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, obviously Marvel wasn't concerned. They offered me the part, but my concerns were that the fans might not respond very well. But hopefully we can prove them that it can work out.
Yeah, I think you did. It's a very good movie. I had a lot of fun. And I'm a huge comic book geek.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, good. And you were okay with the fact that I'm both Human Torch and Captain America?
I don't
You don't care?
I just want. I just want to see Captain America on screen.
There you go. There you go. The way my career has gone so far, most careers, movies are one at a time, and I sometimes struggle with loss of anonymity. I like my privacy, and if ever a movie that I did hit big, and I felt a little too much attention, you have the freedom to step back. You can say, well, I just want to take a break and maybe let this die down a little bit. A 6-picture commitment, you can't do that. Yeah. It's just kind of like, well, if all of a sudden I can't handle what this movie brings, too bad. And 6 movies, that could last 10 years. That's a big decision to make for a huge chunk of time. It just didn't seem like what I was going to do. And I kind of kept saying no, but I was saying no because I was scared. I was running from it. I got a great group of friends and family, and every person in my camp was saying, do this movie, do this movie. And they were saying, Chris, if you're scared of something, that's exactly what you should do. The decisions you don't do are the things you regret more.
And it's a double-edged sword. It's so tricky to complain because if we want to maintain a healthy amount of perspective, let's be real. I'm not in the coal mines. I'm doing what I love to do, and there's job security, and I have the power I have a voice. But there certainly are elements that are undeniable that make things difficult. The good thing is, the great thing is, luckily when we come to the Avengers, I'm surrounded by people with experience, intelligence, and a willingness to help. Downey and Ruffalo and even Scarlett, who's younger than me, but wildly experienced and seasoned in this world, have great advice. And these guys have a way of helping me unplug and bring me back to neutral, and it's incredibly helpful.
Fato é que o estilo loiro e de olho azul e o jeitão americano de Chris Evans caíram como uma luva no personagem, principalmente quando a Marvel decidiu torná-lo o questionador de tudo que acontece no universo dos cinemas. Mas antes de chegar nessa fase, eles precisavam transpor as páginas dos quadrinhos de Joe Simon e Jack Kirby para as telas. Como fazer aquele uniforme se tornar algo crível?
Captain America has been portrayed in the comics as everything from a spandex red, white, and blue costume with wings on the side to a very militarized helmet, goggles, canvas pouches all over it, We're going to find something in the middle there. It is always the challenge of our movies to bring that two-dimensional image to life in a three-dimensional film.
Mais importante que a roupa em si talvez sejam os dois acessórios que moldam o capitão, o capacete e o escudo. E esses dois ganharam uma atenção especial.
The helmet design actually, when we first saw it on him, actually worked better than I had expected that it would. And he's got such a great jawline that it worked out great.
His helmet is based on the flying helmet, so you can see the leather around his face. The straps are really like paratroopers' helmet stripes.
We started with a sculpt based obviously on Chris's head, and then that sculpt was taken and it was flipped digitally on a computer to cause perfect symmetry, because in fact he's got quite an open eye area, which Chris likes, and I think everyone's liked in the development. It's an emblem for the whole way that the suit's been developed in that sort of low-tech, high-tech way.
Believe it or not, for just a circular shield, we had 6 different sizes, we had different depths. We went through various metal spinnings to try and get the correct shape. We had to get this so it hugged Chris's body, so that it actually fitted his arms.
They have so many different shields in this film. We have the heavy shields for the shots where he needs to block myself, or it's going to be a close-up and it's this nice shiny metallic. We have rubber shield when I'm actually knocking someone out with it and I actually got to hit somebody. We've had a couple shields that are magnetic for when I got to slip it on my back. And then we'll use no shield at all every now and then. Every now and then we'll have to do a shot where I have to throw it, and those just CGI it.
The toughest thing about the shield was making it believable that this guy could throw this thing, have it bounce off something and take some guy out and have it come back to him. We tried some practical stuff where he's throwing a rubber shield. Nothing worked until we handed it over to Chris Evans, basically, until we said, okay, you've got this shield that's this wide and it weighs this much. What would you do? How would you throw it? And he came up with some really interesting ways of doing it. He had nothing in his hands. He's just miming the action. It was basically Chris Evans' ability to mime throwing and catching that shield that made it work.
Mas é bom lembrar que antes de vestir isso tudo, Steve Rogers era um cara magrinho, mirrado e que tinha um coração e coragem gigantes. Chris Evans podia dar conta do carisma, mas não ia conseguir ser magro ou fraco o suficiente para que a audiência realmente acreditasse naquela transformação.
We knew that the movie wouldn't work if you didn't buy Skinny Steve at the top. We're going to spend the whole first act with a scrawny version of Steve Rogers before he gets chosen for the program and undergoes the procedure that turns him into Captain America. And if that looked fake, if that didn't feel right, you would lose it entirely.
It's not about the transformation, and we thought very long and hard about how do you do the transformation in a way that hasn't been seen before. And you think about needles and pads and steam and smoke and water and liquids and all this kind of like, how do you do it? And every time you'd think about all the movies that have done it before. And so rather than it being about the transformation, what we decided it was going to be more about establishing the character beforehand. So we're taking Chris's performance and we're actually shrinking him down and scaling him down and thinning him up. And we're doing it using a variety of techniques, but that's one of our sort of more challenging aspects of what we're doing, and something that really hasn't been done to this level.
Para conseguir isso, mais de 10 empresas de efeitos visuais se envolveram na produção para conseguir deixar o Steve magrinho o mais perfeito possível. E não foi só computação gráfica não, teve dublê, teve captura de movimentos, olha, tudo que você imaginar eles tentaram para fazer com que a gente realmente acreditasse naquilo.
As much as possible is Chris basically shrunk. When that didn't work for technical reasons, we photographed a body double, what we call a Skinny Steve, an English guy named Leander Deeney.
Chris is of a kind of heroic build and he needs to be a scrawny loser. That's where I come in. He'll decide how he wants to do the scene and I'll watch him do it 4 or 5 times, and then I do that and try and get an exact copy.
Okay, good. You do one with Chris, you do one with a double, you do one with a clean plate. Sometimes we do one with Chris and slide a green screen in behind him. Sometimes we do one with the double and put tracking markers on his face. Frankly, because we wanted to give the effects houses as much information as they needed, because we knew the process wouldn't be easy, and we knew that from shot to shot they'd have to vary their technique.
E se nos outros filmes a S.H.I.E.L.D. foi citada e explorada brevemente, a Marvel tinha aqui a melhor chance de explicar a origem e o real papel deles naquele mundo. Para isso, eles trouxeram Hayley Atwell para viver Peggy Carter, par romântico de Steve Rogers e uma das agentes mais importantes da Marvel. Além de Dominic Cooper, que viveu a versão jovem de Howard Stark, pai do Homem de Ferro.
There's not many comic books about Peggy. There's a lot of comic books about her I think it's her niece, Sharon. So did you feel more liberty? You had more liberty to work your character since there's no not many.
Yeah, well,
Cheryl.
she's in the script. It's very clear who she is, and so that became my point of reference. So she's works in the military as an officer, and she's very strong, self-determined, capable, and someone who knows exactly what she wants. So that's kind of, that's where I took the took all the information from.
How do you feel being part of the Stark legacy now?
I don't know. I kind of suddenly get very worried, or I did at the beginning when we started shooting, because it means so much to so many people. As you just said, it's a legacy, and
It is.
you do what you can, and you hope that what you're doing people will like, because ultimately Howard Stark is the guy who starts the company off, and it's such a multi-layered, intriguing character who's an inventor and an entrepreneur and a creative man at the same time as being a fun-loving, living life to the full ladies' man. There's so much you could do with it, and you just hope that what you have done and being part of it is going to appeal to the people that are so obsessed and care so much for it.
Além deles dois, tinha um outro coadjuvante essencial para esse filme, Bucky Barnes, o melhor amigo de Steve Rogers. Pouco conhecido pelo público geral, ele viria a ser um dos ícones dessa fase futura da Marvel, e por isso o estúdio assinou um contrato de 7 filmes com Sebastian Stan.
And Bucky obviously is very different from the comics, especially the old ones, because he was a kid, like a sidekick, and now he plays like a hero, like a.
Well, he's a different kind of hero, you know what I mean? I mean, I think this version gives him more validity, and it makes him a little bit more of a person, and with layers, and not necessarily just one-dimensional.
I had him on the ropes. I know you did.
O negócio agora era lidar com o oposto da SHIELD, a Hydra. A organização está sempre presente nos quadrinhos do Capitão e tem papel mega importante em inúmeras aventuras dos Vingadores. Para conseguir transformá-la em algo crível, a Marvel se inspirou em várias experiências mal sucedidas dos nazistas e transformaram a Hydra em uma espécie de ordem especial do eixo do mal. E para simbolizar isso tudo existia a figura do Caveira Vermelha, o vilão com um dos visuais mais incríveis do universo Marvel e que teria Hugo Weaving como responsável para o representar nas telas.
He had been working with this scientist, Erskine, that Stanley Tucci plays. And Erskine had been sort of working under duress, under Hitler and under Schmidt. And Schmidt had sort of forced Stanley's character Erskine he was developing this serum. And Schmidt takes the serum and injects himself and then becomes Red Skull. So the Schmidt you see at the beginning of the film looks a little bit like me, but my face is actually the mask that he wears to get on in the world without people being horrified by the way he looks. But Red Skull is the character he's become as a result of the serums.
The prosthetic is in 7 pieces. Everything's broken up into different sections, which is why it takes 3.5 hours to stick on.
First, there's a bald cap has to go on just to smooth down my head. The next thing after the bald cap is to glue the face and powder it, and that seems to work well with the sweat. I still sweat, but it doesn't pour out as much.
They're designed in a way, they all interlock. So the back piece goes on first, and then we have the top piece, which comes over the forehead, and then we have the face piece, which is the biggest piece, and it has this funny little locking area around here, which is part of the design. I designed it so it had a little kind of curve.
You are deluded, Captain. You pretend to be a simple soldier, but in reality, you are just afraid to admit that we have left humanity behind.
E foi literalmente das mãos do Caveira Vermelha que veio uma das ligações mais importantes do Capitão América com o universo Marvel, o Tesseract. Aquele cubo mágico que é o centro da trama do primeiro Vingador seria o protagonista do filme da super equipe que estrearia dentro de alguns meses. E ainda seria mais importante depois dele. Mas uma cena pegou o público de surpresa e finalmente colocou todos os Vingadores no mesmo lugar e na mesma era.
Good morning. Or should I say afternoon?
Where am I?
You're in a recovery room in New York City.
Where am I really?
I'm afraid I don't understand.
The game. It's from May 1941. I know because I was there. Well, I'm going to ask you again. Where am I?
Captain Rogers.
Who are you?
Captain Rogers, wait! All agents code 13. I repeat, all agents code 13.
Look, I'm sorry about that little show back there, but we thought it best to break it to you slowly.
Break what?
You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years. You gonna be okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a date.
Desde o lançamento de Homem de Ferro, poucos filmes da Marvel foram tão bem recebidos pela crítica como Capitão América. O tom de época, o visual que misturava os quadrinhos com a realidade da guerra e a ação comandada por Joe Johnston agradou muita gente, mas não tanto o público. No fim das contas, as reações foram mistas e a bilheteria do filme não chegou a decepcionar, mas ficou no meio do caminho. Na verdade, isso pouco importava para Marvel, que olhava para o filme como uma oportunidade de apresentar o herói que se transformaria no símbolo de resistência, questionamento e liberdade do próprio país em um futuro bem próximo.
You know Ultron's trying to tear us apart, right?
Well, I guess you'd know. Whether you tell us is a bit of a question.
Banner and I were doing research.
That would affect the team.
That would end the team. Isn't that the mission? Isn't that the why we fight? So we can end the fight? So we get to go home?
Every time someone tries to win a war before it starts, innocent people die. Every time.
Mas antes de evoluir na sua trama individual, o Capitão ia mostrar que liderança e princípios não têm época. Ao lado do Homem de Ferro, do Hulk, do Thor, da Viúva Negra, do Gavião Arqueiro e do Nick Fury, ele ia realizar o sonho de gerações e gerações que leram páginas e páginas de quadrinhos e que sonharam muitas vezes em ver os seus heróis em carne e osso nas telas. Aquela mesma geração que sempre acreditou que um dia aqueles homens e mulheres que vestiam uniformes e lutavam pelos oprimidos e pelo que é certo iam finalmente virar um sinônimo de sucesso. Era a hora dos Vingadores. E no próximo episódio do especial Marvel 10 anos, vamos finalmente falar sobre o filme que mudou não só o gênero de super-heróis, mas o cinema como um todo. Os Vingadores. Vamos discutir as dificuldades de unir os atores, de esconder os detalhes da trama, de principalmente conseguir fazer com que aquele time tão diferente funcionasse e mostrar como que o mundo inteiro mudou depois que essa equipe dominou a cultura pop de uma vez por todas.